The cigarette-smoking man, aka Cancer Man, emerged from the silent background of the early show to become the primary opponent of Mulder. After only the 3 appearances of Season 1 we've already seen, which were all of them, by the way, it became clear that he was directly involved in the major episodes and events that Mulder was investigating for the Ark story. But then in his 4th appearance of Season 2, One Breath, we saw him, at home, living what seems the most ordinary and lonely life.
You should be the one to die.
Why? Look at me. No wife, no family, some power. I'm in the game because I believe what I'm doing is right.
And it was something that seemed to only add to the enigma. His reach seemed unfathomable, and yet he was no James Bond villain. There was no collection of troops or guards for his penthouse suite or mansion, no collection of mistresses drawn to his power, no servants maintaining his home or handling his needs, no signs of extravagant wealth, and aside of the gun on the table, he could just as easily spend his day selling appliances for all that you can see. He strikes against expectations. He's like finding Pinhead at home making muffins in a Kiss the Cook apron. In fact, finding him relaxing there watching old movies, he's really no different than Mulder when we think about his life, except he doesn't have signs that he's sleeping on the couch because his bedroom is filled with files, or has an answer machine full of sex line girls checking in on the #1 customer. He might be, of course, but somehow I'd think that CSM had the resources to do better than pay $4.99 a minute to touch his own dick. But you don't know. It was hardly what was expected of the man. For all we know, that house wasn't his home. He was only there because he wanted Mulder to find him that night. That's the problem with people manipulating behind the scenes. You can never be entirely sure that they're not manipulating you too. Musings of a Cigarette-Smoking Man is a story about him, and like the man himself, you can't really be certain of what you're seeing, but it does offer a peek into that life, even if it's not dead-on, fact-straight accurate. In its inaccuracy, it does provide us with some kind of an insight into him. The episode is primarily from his viewpoint, as he is spying on the lone gunman, because Frohike believes that he has found out some information on CSM, and when we see him set up and ready to kill him for that. Imagine how he'd feel about Facebook. Frohike says the guy's parents both died when he was extraordinarily young. Mother of lung cancer, father executed for treason. He was supplying secrets to the communists. As a ward of the state, he was a loner and a bookworm, until we enter our first story, of him as a captain in the army tied to special warfare at Fort Bragg, where we learn of a list of things that he did not do. Very specific things he didn't do in a very specific way, involving very specific means of killing very specific people. Which, of course, he wouldn't do. And wouldn't do very, very well. So he was here to be given a special assignment so big on the did not do that, he would have to become a was not ever. He'd have to leave the army and have his records destroyed. That job, to kill JFK. His failure to properly handle the Bay of Pigs led to the Cuban Missile Crisis. I'll get to that next week. But suffice to say, we reached what is usually considered the closest we ever have to global nuclear war. Well, because of that, he's going to have to go. He's just too great a threat. So we see how, under the alias of Hunt, that CSM now works with Lee Harvey Oswald, who thinks he's just assisting, to actually be the patsy. Oswald also gives his pack of cigarettes to CSM, even though he never smokes. Anyway, neither in the schoolbook depository nor on the grassy knoll, the assassin is playing the long odds and going for the storm drain. When Oswald is arrested, CSM is in the theater, lighting up. What does that all mean? I'll get to that soon. We see him in the next story, which is strangely all shot in black and white, and he's writing a story that seems like it's based on himself. But as he finishes, we hear a speech by Martin Luther King Jr. playing on the radio, speaking of Marxist revolutions around the world and the failure of American democracy, leading to the second major involvement, the assassination of Martin Luther King. To justify why they would want him dead, they turned to a bit of old-school propaganda, that he and his group were connected to the communists, and that would be a problem. It was feared that because of his power in unifying the black community, he was creating a, quote, Negro army, that he could then use as part of a Marxist uprising to perpetuate the downfall of the United States. What tiny evidence exists is completely circumstantial, and there is absolutely no evidence he was planning a violent attack. But for the purposes of the story, CSM and the others believe that it is too likely to take a chance, even though he not only has no racial prejudice against Martin Luther King, but actually has a positive view of him.
You actually sound sad about it.
I respect King. He's an extraordinary man.
This ties it back into the assassination of Kennedy. His superior explained that extraordinary men are those who make a decision to shape the nation or the world and take a productive step forward in making it happen, like CSM's father or CSM himself. By calling him the same thing, CSM is saying that King has made a decision to do so as well and is working to bring that about. But that it could be the same kind of thing as his father's own embracing of communism, a misguided attempt that jeopardized their nation. There's the idea of discrediting him, of course.
We could create a film of him with a woman other than his wife. Using existing footage, we could insert him in a film we make of a woman.
Now, ironically, the thing they're talking about framing him with actually has a lot more basis in fact, with multiple sources backing up the idea that, well, far from home, surrounded by adoring followers, sooner or later that King might, ask her if she's been to the mountaintop, and if not, would she like to?
Of course, when it comes to King's legacy and message, it doesn't have anything to do with anything. It's just that back then it was much more of a big deal. I mean, that's why it was called a sex scandal. Today, a sex scandal is just, would you put your dick away for 5 minutes so we can maybe deal with the fact our planet is melting?
Anyway, CSM thinks this is all pointless. Only the most extreme solution is going to work. So he decides to assassinate King personally and set up a cracker patsy, James Earl Ray. Ray was playing as his business partner in a gun sale, so he had an indirect tie to the assassination through him. And so with everything in place, CSM shot MLK. Well, Cancer Gump seems to have finished his waltz through history to the recent, at the time, Christmas Eve 1991 events. Anita Hill, Rodney King trial, breaking up of Yugoslavia, and most importantly...
What I don't want to see is the Bills winning the Super Bowl. As long as I'm alive, that doesn't happen.
Could be a simple grudge, but when you get into that wacky X-Files stuff, you almost wonder if there's more to it. Like there's some alien creature that lives in Buffalo that would try to use the Super Bowl victory to arrive with the team to meet the president and take over his brain or something. Another big event was the resignation of Gorbachev and official dissolution of the Soviet Union, leading to the remark that there are no more enemies left by one of his subordinates. Although we'll see about that. During all of this, a number of common elements have been seen. First, there's a connection to Mulder. A picture of him as a baby with his mother is shown to CSM by the proud father, a picture that we see CSM possessing several times throughout this, and with a comment about spending time at Christmas around family, he walks past Mulder's door, hesitant, and then heads for home. Inconsistencies abound, like his feelings on cigarettes or on the movies, which is a sign that he's a liar even to those he works for. And he's constantly writing, constantly trying to get that story out there, and constantly getting back rejection letters. Harsh, demoralizing papers, coming one after another, stacking up higher and higher and higher into a glowing pack of hate, constantly looking down and judging you until the only solace you can find is doing your crappy internet review show. The point is that what we're seeing is likely not what's actually happened, but rather how he sees the events and shares them in his work. Maybe he killed Kennedy, or maybe he just wished he did, or he was involved in arranging it and so feels like he did. It also speaks of his ego, seeing himself as an intelligent man who prefers books to the trash of film, and yet when he sits down to write himself, he's creatively vacuous, creating a sort of autobiography in the guise of fiction that publishers find preposterous, which is bad enough, but the letters also show a sign that he doesn't have the chops. So atrocious are his writing skills themselves that they are described as crap by a publisher who offers the constructive criticism, this is actually shown in the episode, the best thing to do with his work at this point is burn it. But of course, the first work will usually suck. You're still learning, but it seems that even decades later, he's still working it and still not making anything out of it. When he sits down at the typewriter now, he writes about loneliness and sacrifice and wanting a second chance. But this is interrupted by a call that shows the idea that there's no more enemies is premature. There's an EBE, and he and Deep Throat need to decide what to do with it. He reflects on the fact that the two of them have been witnesses to the shaping of so much history, but their names will never be known. And perhaps that's part of what makes him right. It is a chance to leave something with a mark on it, even if the name isn't really his own. It has his stamp on it. He and Deep Throat debate on who should be the one to kill it.
I'm the liar. You're the killer.
Your lies have killed more men in a day than I have in a lifetime. I've never killed anybody.
Maybe I'm not the liar.
I have a chance to go an entire lifetime without killing anybody.
That line in particular raises the antenna and asks, how brazen can your bullshit be? It is such a lie, the question is why tell it? Unless possibly it was true and that he never pulled the trigger like we saw, but envisioned those things. Either that, or for some reason he is so terrified of killing the alien that he'll say anything, no matter how absurd, to get out of it. They flip a coin and Deep Throat has to pull the trigger, and as he does, CSM takes off his nicotine patch and lights up. So perhaps there's a different meaning to what he said about going an entire lifetime without killing. Remember that he claimed not to be a smoker, and then after he killed Kennedy he was lighting up? The cigarette is his hat. I mean, the only thing he has ever called is Cigarette Smoking Man. It's what he wears when he is this person, living this life. Whenever he puts that down, he is trying to get that second chance, that new life.
His novel is finally picked up for a magazine called Romana Clef. Romana Clef is when a real-life event is turned into a fiction. One of the most famous examples being the film Primary Colors, which was a Romana Clef of the 1992 Clinton campaign.
He's ecstatic. He types up his letter of resignation and crushes his cigarette pack, only to find that they've set it up like some cheeseball exploitation story and changed the ending. And of course that has a double meaning, since this being based on him, the story is even called Second Chance. It now changes his ending. He doesn't retire to pursue this new life, he has to go on with it.
He's the most dangerous man alive. Not so much because he believes in his actions, but because he believes these actions are all which life allows him.
And he nearly discovers that firsthand when he exits and is in CSM's crosshairs. But quoting his character, he says to himself that he could kill Frohicke any time, but not today. Musings of a Cigarette-Smoking Man is not part of the ARC story since its events are highly questionable, but at the same time it is such a great hour and provides an interesting examination of this character that I'm going to list it as a must-see. It has shades of Apocalypse Now and Forrest Gump, particularly him on a park bench doing a monologue of life is like a box of chocolates, but that like such a gift, life sucks. But it's intriguing and amusing to consider how CSM's stories parallel famous movies while claiming that he completely loathes them. Frohicke's line about him is also interesting when one considers those ties to Mulder, about how, like the CSM, he seems to live this lonely, obsessive existence as if it was the only option he has. Overall, this is a well-crafted, well-executed look at an essential character that still leaves us with questions, such as why he would choose not to kill Frohicke. In fact, in the original script, he did. What are his motivations for that? A longer plan that he's decided on? A moment of sentimental weakness? A way of trying to find that second chance? Maybe even something as simple as somebody out there actually knowing who he is, to have his name on this work after all.
Be all over.